The Metamorphosis. Franz Kafka was a German-language writer, born in the Czech Republic, and is considered one of the most original authors in modern literature. His works explore themes of alienation, anxiety, and isolation within an absurd and oppressive society. His most famous works include The Metamorphosis, The Trial, and The Castle. His stories are so distinctive that they gave rise to the term Kafkaesque, referring to bizarre, surreal, and often nightmarish situations with deep philosophical undertones. Gregor woke up one morning feeling strange. However, when he tried to move his body, he realized something was wrong. He was no longer in human form. He had several thin legs, a rounded, hard shell, covering his back, and the body of an insect. He turned his head to look around his bed. His human appearance was gone, and he had no idea how to control this new body. What is this? A dream? Or has this really happened to me? He was shocked, but soon remembered that he had to go to work. He was the sole breadwinner of his family, working as a traveling salesman. If he missed even a single day, his boss would surely scold him. However, in his current state, even getting out of bed was a challenge. His body was no longer flexible or familiar, and every movement felt foreign. He struggled to roll out of bed, but his rounded shell made it difficult to move. As time passed, his family began knocking on his door. His mother gently called out, asking if he had overslept. His younger sister, Greet, called his name with growing concern. But the most anxious of them all was his father. His father grew increasingly impatient when Gregor didn't respond, and eventually sent a company representative to check on him. As the voices outside his door grew louder, Gregor had no choice but to roll his body off the bed. When he landed on the floor, he struggled to balance himself on his sticky legs. He needed to open the door, but he had no hands. Desperately, he moved his legs to grasp the doorknob, and after several attempts, he finally managed to open it. The moment the door opened, his family was struck with horror. Standing before them was not a human being but a giant insect. His mother collapsed in shock, his sister covered her mouth and stepped back, and his father was filled with rage. His father grabbed an apple from a fruit basket nearby and threw it at Gregor, shouting, "What is this monstrosity? Are you trying to humiliate this family?" Gregor wanted to explain that he had no control over his transformation, but his voice no longer produced human words. No one could understand him. He watched in despair as his family reacted with disgust and fear. His father, unwilling to accept what had become of Gregor, forced him back into his room and slammed the door shut. From that moment on, he was confined to his room, isolated from the rest of the house. As time passed, Gregor gradually adapted to his insect body. At first, he could barely move, but he soon discovered that crawling on walls and ceilings felt natural. He began experiencing the world in a completely different way, exploring every corner of his room and finding comfort in clinging to the ceiling. However, his relationship with his family had completely changed. At first, his sister Greet took care of him. She would cautiously open his door, leave him food, and clean his room. Initially, Gregor tried to eat the food he once enjoyed as a human, but he soon realized that his new body could only digest rotten food. Over time, even Greet grew tired. At first, she cared for him with sympathy, but as the days went by, she became increasingly burdened by the tasks. Once the provider of his household, Gregor had now become a burden. His family, initially shocked and sympathetic, began to grow indifferent. His room turned into a storage space, filled with discarded and useless items. His existence became a mere inconvenience, and even Greet, who had once been his closest ally, started to resent him. One day, his father attacked him again. Picking up apples from the basket, he threw them at Gregor with fury. One of them lodged deep into Gregor's back, causing him immense pain. Unable to remove it, he grew weaker by the day. His family no longer paid attention to him. He listened from his room as they spoke of their plans, realizing they had completely given up on him. But the final blow came from his sister. "He is no longer my brother. We can't keep living like this." Hearing those words, Gregor felt a deep sense of loss. He stopped eating entirely, his movements grew weaker, and finally, on a cold early morning, he quietly took his last breath. The next morning, his family discovered that he had died. His parents sighed in relief, and his sister smiled as she gazed out the window. With Gregor gone, they felt they could finally reclaim a peaceful life. They left the house for a walk in the park, discussing their future plans. Gregor's existence was no longer a topic of conversation. His presence was being erased from their memory. Kafka's The Metamorphosis raises profound questions about the meaning of human existence, the role of family, and the burdens imposed by societal expectations. Gregor's transformation and his family's shifting attitudes symbolize how individuals can be discarded when they lose their social function. Gregor is not just an insect that represents the fate of anyone who, at any moment, could be forgotten and abandoned by those closest to them. His tragic fate leaves a lasting impact on the reader, relationships,
forcing us to reflect on the fragile nature of human relationships.